Hello. This week we come to the 15th week of the church year, and this is the year of C, so therefore it's the year of Luke. The readings are, the first reading comes from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 30, verses 10 through 14, from Paul's letter attributed to the Colossians, chapter 1, verses 15 through 20, and the gospel comes from Luke's chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. So we will be following pretty regularly now over the next few weeks, sequentially, the gospel attributed to Luke. This time, we will, in the gospel, come to perhaps one of the most famous parables known to everyone, and a parable found only, by the way, in the Gospel of Luke, namely the parable which we call the Good Samaritan. Now, if you think about it, I suspect that particular story is well known, and even in, I remember years ago there was a collection of short stories, and students would read them, and this would be one of the short stories that was included. So it was known not only in religious literature, but also in generally world literature as one of the more classic tales that everyone in a certain way was familiar with. Now, the gospel itself is divided really into two parts. The first part is that Jesus is questioned by one of the leaders of the people. He is called a lawyer, and he raises a question with Jesus which admittedly is considered to be a test. So when you think of it that way, and those of you who are familiar with lawyer style, and I don't mean to, I have to be careful here, but lawyers never ask questions that they don't already know the answer to, or at least that's the philosophy that's at work here. And it's also the work here in this particular episode in Luke's story, that the questioner, who is pictured as a lawyer, asks Jesus, what does he consider to be the most important message in the Torah, in the law. Now, what it seems to be the idea is that in asking this question, the lawyer hopes that if he can trick Jesus into giving an answer which is different, he will bring dishonor to Jesus. And keep in mind that this, of course, is an issue that we have noticed on many occasions, the importance of honor in the first century world, in the Mediterranean world. So, and also, we need to keep in mind that questions, when they were raised in this regard, are seldom looking for information, okay? They are most always viewed with suspicion as a challenge to the personal honor. So keep that in mind here, that the arrogant, if you want, arrogant lawyer, or the lawyer here, is really not looking for information that he doesn't know, but that he's really seeking to put Jesus in a position where he will be shamed. Now, and we know this because Luke points out that the question is raised by the lawyer as a test. If he were really looking for just information, it would be a little different, wouldn't it? All right. Now, Jesus, in fact, and we don't always think of him as doing this, responds to the lawyer by insulting him. Because he says to the questionnaire, well, how do you read the Torah? How do you understand it? And forces, in a certain way, the lawyer to answer his own question. So it's kind of a clever way in which this works. And of course, the lawyer then quotes Deuteronomy and Leviticus. That is, those are two books that make up what we know as the Pentateuch. And he says, well, you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and spirit, etc. And you love your neighbor. Now, so notice that Jesus has forced in a certain way, or the questionnaire has not realized what he has been led into, to give the answer, the right answer really to the question, which is the greatest of the commandments, to love God and to love neighbor. And so, in order to get himself a little bit off the hook, we now find the lawyer as posing another question to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Who are my neighbors? Now, also keep in mind that the questionnaire should know the answer. The neighbor is someone who needs one's help. So this is not original, but it opens the door for the parable that follows. All right, also keep in mind that there has always been a tension in Luke's gospel between the lawyer. Now, the lawyer would be part of the Pharisee group, and we have noticed on other occasions, and it's important to notice here, the Pharisees often get a bad rap, and perhaps in Luke's gospel, that's more the case than in other gospels. And we have noticed, and I kind of review this, that at the time that the Gospel of Luke is being written, sometime in the middle of the 80s, so we are pretty certain, the remaining group of leaders within the Hebraic community are the Pharisees. And at this point, their headquarters happens to also be in the Galilee, because in the year 70, you remember, the Jerusalem temple had been destroyed. The Judeans had been really subjected to Roman rule, and if there was some opportunity for the Jewish leadership to still function effectively, it had to move from the south up to the north. We believe that basically the Pharisee group settled in Tiberias, which of course was a city built by Herod Antipas, you remember earlier on, hoping to attract folks to come to the Galilee. All right, so all of that again is a little bit of background to say, all right, and maybe this would be the point to move now to why the choice of the first reading is given, which comes from the book of Deuteronomy. Notice that it is chapter 30. This is toward the end of the book. We believe that the material that is found in the book of Deuteronomy, which remember is the fifth book, and really that is of the Pentateuch, and really it is entitled A Second Telling. So really what the book of Deuteronomy does is retell in its own way and against its own background the story of the Exodus. And it places considerable emphasis on the importance of the law or the Torah. And it pictures Moses, and that's how this appears in the book of Deuteronomy, as talking to the Israelites as they are getting ready to enter into the promised land. He has told them that he will not be able to enter, and he doesn't, but he wants to encourage them as they make this journey, having 40 years been in the wilderness, now into the land of promise, to take with them the fundamental command of Moses. Now, the command of Moses is good, and it's important to notice that Jesus never rejects it. And sometimes in our preaching we have suggested the opposite, but There is no saying no, that the Torah is not to be observed. And again, it is the basic principle, love God, love your neighbor. All right, so Moses tells the Israelites, keep this in mind and do this. And this is the treasure that you are to take with you as you entered the promised land. So in order to give validity to the Torah, now keep in mind the Torah begins to be, by the time that Luke writes his gospel, the core message that the Israeli community, both those who live in the Holy Land and those who live also in what is known as the diaspora, and we have mentioned on a number of occasions that there were Jewish communities in various important cities surrounding the Mediterranean world and also in other places in the Middle East. And so if the message they were to live by was that of Moses, then this was highly honored. And it was not dishonored by believers in Jesus. So all of that is prologue to the answer now that Luke poses or pictures Jesus as posing to the lawyer who says, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, everyone kind of knows the story of the Good Samaritan, all right? Or at least I think that many people do, as I started by saying. So a man goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho. To begin with, it might be important to notice the direction that's happening here. People are moving from Jerusalem to Jericho. Could you go the other way? Yes. And what is there? And there is what was known as the Jericho Road or the Bloody Road, because it's a very quick ascent or descent, depending on which direction you're going, from Jerusalem to Jericho. Jerusalem is well above sea level. Jericho is below sea level, close to and on the same parallel plane as the Dead Sea. As you know, the Dead Sea is one of the lowest spots on the planet. And but Jericho, to its credit, was a prosperous city, okay, and had a long history. We've talked about this before, a history that dates back thousands of years. So for whatever reason, this particular site where Jericho was attractive to many groups and to many people. All right, so a man is going down from Jerusalem to this place, and he is attacked by robbers and beat up and left to the side of the road. Well, is he dying? How serious is his illness? Or not illness, it's his affliction. We're not sure, but at least it isn't good. All right, so that's how it begins. As I say, this was known as the Bloody Road, and usually people didn't travel on this road alone. You usually traveled with others. The assumption here is that the man is traveling on an animal. What would the animal be? Well, it would be a mule or a donkey, probably not a horse, because they just wouldn't have those as part of the kind of animal collection, canine, that they would be familiar with. All right, now what happens, you remember, is that two members of the religious community of Israel, and we can see that this, by the way, parable is divided, those who look at these things, into what they call 7 scenes, okay? So the first, as we mentioned, is that the robbers strip and leave the victim half dead. And when they strip him of his clothes, now maybe we didn't pay attention to that, but when they strip him of his clothes, they also strip him of his identity. We really don't know what background this person is. Is he Jewish? Is he Gentile? You see, and we may not pay a lot of attention to stripping a man of his clothes, but let me point that out so that his really identity is unknown. And it's hard to see him lying at the side of the road now, I suppose, with some garment, but not much that would identify or be able to identify who he was. So along comes a priest and a Levite, and they see this man. So this would be part 2, the priest riding a donkey. Now, as he is going along, keep in mind that he is coming from Jerusalem toward Jericho. So if he, so the story goes, touches the man and is rendered impure, as some interpreters say, he would have to, now, here would be the question, would he return to Jericho and then later on come back and in that whole process be rendered impure? Or if it is a question of purity, and that is one that some interpreters connect here with this story, others not, he would have to turn around wherever the victim was, if he had stopped to help him, and would have had to return to Jerusalem. Now, what we don't know is where on this road, which is estimated to be about 23 miles, and it is a sudden drop, as I mentioned, from Jerusalem to Jericho, this really happened, okay? We don't know. There's not markers on the side of the road that sometimes you find today. Oh, here's some event happened, all right? So the wanting not to have to return to Jerusalem, if this is the question, and has a business with Jericho, whatever it is, passes on. All right? This is followed by a Levite who also comes on the road. Now keep in mind that this road is not a straight road, okay? If you're going downhill as quickly as I suggested this was, you would have to have kind of curves in order to kind of safely make it. I give you all of this geography because I think it's important in appreciating how this story unfolds and why it does in the way in which it does. So the Levite, now here's the point. The Levite is connected with the priest. If the priest is passed by, the Levite understands that there must have been a reason why he did this, that is the priest, so he too passes by. He doesn't want to dishonor the priest. He doesn't want to bring dishonor to him. Keep in mind how we go back and forth about this honor issue and its importance. So he too goes to the other side and passes by. Neither of them really check the identity of the man who has been beat up and left on the side of the road. All right? Now, comes the third person. Good story. Keep in mind that Luke is very good at telling stories. And those of you who are familiar with stories or even jokes know that you always kind of pay attention to the third, okay? The first and second are kind of setups for what happens next. Could that be the way in which Luke has constructed this? You have the priest, you have the Levite, and now you have this, surprising person who turns out to be a Samaritan. Now, in some ways, if you were Hebraic, Judean, this would be a surprise. You would say, well, if he's a Samaritan, I guess he's just going to pass by too. Why would he stop and take care of this man? But he does, and that would be episode 5. In fact, he gives what we smiling today would be what we would consider first aid, okay? He has wine, he has oil, and he has bandages. And now think about this, the Samaritan is taking a risk here. If he goes over to help this man who is half dying, could he still be alive? Would he, if the wrong person was trying to help him, react to him in a negative way? We never really think of that because we don't know, as I say, the identity of the man who has been robbed and beat up. He well could be, now this could be interesting, he could be a Samaritan, or he could be a Jew, or he could be a Gentile. Who is he? Who is the man who is victimized? We have no knowledge, and the parable does not give us any, only that he is a victim. Now, Samaritans. We have mentioned before that there was a great deal of tension between the Judeans and the Samaritans. But I think it's fair enough to say that Samaritans were Jewish. This is not a Gentile Jewish tale, but it is a tale that involves caring for someone who is in need. So, whoever this stranger is who stops and takes care of the man is taking a risk. We assume that the beat-up man is not able to perhaps defend himself too much. As the story unfolds in the 6th episode, he puts the man on his own beast. That's why I'm saying the man must have had a certain wealth or goods, because, you know, a poor person would have walked. They would have not be able to use an animal. So there are a lot of understandings here that are built into the story that I'm sure you captured, but that are important maybe to notice. And, of course, to make this a classic story, he takes the man, having bandaged him, having kind of taken care of his wounds, takes him to an inn on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, we're not sure that there was ever an inn there. However, if you visit the Holy Land today, they will take you to a museum that has been built on the road rather, down to Jerusalem, or from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's turning out to be a wonderful visiting place for tourists today, okay? In fact, if you drive, you can drive in. There's a parking lot. There's a nice museum. There are pictures there. The industry of tourism in Israel today, despite the setbacks that are happening now, have turned this into an interesting museum, really. And it's there, of course, you could say, well, this would have been a nice place. But we're not sure that there was ever an inn there. But to make the story work well, there is an inn. The stranger brings in the beat-up person, tells the man who runs the inn, look, take care of him, and if he runs up gives him some money, but if he runs up any cost over and above what I'm giving you, I will repay you when I return. In effect, he says to the runner of the inn, here's my credit card. They didn't have those, of course, but put whatever he needs on my bill, and I will repay you on my return. So what's interesting here is that the stranger, that the Samaritan, who we now call good, is planning to return. So it's not going to be just going one way and that's it, but that in fact he will return. So all of that, of course, we're very familiar with the story. We don't know what now. What one might notice is that having told this parable, Jesus then flips it. Remember, the questionnaire is the lawyer, flips to him and says, who is the neighbor here? and thus forces, if you want, not only the lawyer, but also the audience. Who is neighbor? And that's a good way in which parables often were supposed to end. They were not supposed to end giving an answer, but they were supposed to end by raising a kind of question with the audience or with the person. So who is the neighbor? Now, very kind of cleverly, Luke pictures the lawyer as giving an answer. Well, he says, I suppose it's the one who was in need. And yes, there's a great truth to that, and that's often how many of our homilies with regard to this story take place. So, who is the neighbor? Well, the one who is in need. Does he have to be a Samaritan? Does he have to be a Judean? Does he have to be a Gentile? Well, anyone who is in need. And that perhaps is why we like this parable, because it has a kind of universalism to it. The person who is in need of help, of support from neighbor, could be anyone. Could be your next door neighbor, could be someone in the community. And of course, that is another way in which we interpret it. What this particular parable does set up is a number of possibilities for interpretation. And that's perhaps interesting. But I thought that as we had looked at this parable today, a little bit of his historical background, again reviewing that it actually is a road today that exists going up or down, depending on which direction you're going. And off to one side, as you begin this road down, is the village of Bethany. And next week we will see that there is a story that's connected with this village at Bethany that also is part of the road story. Again, keep in mind, as we've mentioned so often, and one of the characteristics of Luke is the idea of a journey. So here is a classic parable that is about a journey from Jerusalem, a journey to Jericho. We never always think of that and I keep bringing that up as we look at Luke this year, how frequently and how cleverly the writer authors in journey ideas. Sometimes they are people, and sometimes in this case, it's a parable, but it's also about a journey. And why this man is going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, that is the Samaritan, and stops to help the man in need, we don't know. We really don't know much more about this man, do we? We hear his promise that when he returns, he will take care of any financial debt that the man he has rescued makes, but that's really all we know. We don't know whether he was a merchant. We don't know whether he was going on holiday. We don't know whether he was going to visit relatives. You see, you can play around with this parable and come up with a large number of possibilities, and so that makes for a good storytelling, doesn't it? As I say, we are not informed about, by the way, whether he ever returned as he promised to pay that bill too. So if next time you write your novel about the Samaritan and the good story, keep some of these questions in mind. But again, the parable puts the lawyer who asked the question on notice, okay? That maybe he too, the questionnaires and those who are pictured as raising the issue with Jesus to love, namely the message of Moses, love God, love neighbor, is to be expanded in each direction, whoever the person in need might be. So with this very familiar story, I hope that maybe we have added a few things just to consider as we come to worship again this week. Thank you for being with us. Hope to see you again.